Thank you very much. Oh, I've got a couple of really tough acts to follow. I don't have a big fairy book and I can't sing, so I hope I don't bore anybody from the rest of the really exciting papers that we've had today. So many of you will already be aware that I'm a PhD student at Queen's, and my PhD thesis looks at the history of gay rights activism in Northern Ireland. But that's not what this paper is about. This paper is about a side project that Richard actually brought to me in the late summer of last year. Richard very kindly told me that there were undiscovered documents in Cara-Friend's offices in Belfast. And whenever you're a researcher and you hear about undiscovered documents, it's like it's a holy grail of research. Richard very kindly set up a meeting with Cara-Friend, and we went to their headquarters in Warren Street and found these boxes of papers. This is after I had already started sorting through the collection. So like Lindsay said, I'd done a placement here during my master's degree in 2017. So I picked up a few bits and pieces about cataloguing collections, and I was able to go through everything and sort it out and look at all the different correspondence, and it took me quite a while, but it was really the most incredible material. And given that I'm also writing a chapter in my thesis about the history of Cara-Friend, it was a perfect opportunity for me. So we decided that the natural place for the documents to come would be PRONI, because that's where the rest of the Cara-Friend collection is. So mostly this paper, I just want to talk about some of the highlights that I came across in these new documents and what might be available for future research or for a good nosy if anybody's interested. So I also want to give a really brief overview of the existing archive. I don't want to dip in too much because I know that some of the master's students are going to talk about that afterwards, but I just want to give an idea of what's already there. So there's really detailed accounts booklet, and that has everything from people going out to buy their notebooks to record phone calls to catering for enormous conferences where people have peach pie and ham cheese sandwiches, and all of that is detailed in the accounts, so you can actually recreate your own 1980s conference if you want to. Then there's also heaps and heaps of correspondence, and the correspondence is some of the most valuable historical records that we have for LGBT history in Northern Ireland. They detail everything about what life was like in the 1970s and 1980s, and that really documents everything from urban and rural experiences to isolation and mental health problems, people looking for information for the scene, anything you would want to know about being LGBT in the 1970s in Belfast is in those letters. There is also annual reports and management files, which are really valuable because they detail everything about Cara-Friend as an organisation and what they did every year, and they outline the response to different issues that came up throughout the course of the last 50 years. There are also over 24 telephone logbooks and 88 telephone report files. Can't even say it, never mind get through them all. So it's an absolutely enormous archive, and it's as far as I know, it's one of the most popular in PRONI. But anyway, what I found in the new archives, the fountain documents of Cara-Friend, I was extremely excited to find these. Most people who've sort of gone into activist history in Belfast will know that Cara-Friend was initially formed from the Gay Liberation Society, who had attempted to establish a phone line so that people could get in contact with someone else who was either gay or lesbian for the first time. And that service proved so immensely popular that on the first night of operation, it collapsed the university switchboards, which really highlighted the need for an independent service. So the documents are, there's an extra page, but yeah, so these are the pages on which Cara-Friend decided whether or not they would maintain an affiliation with the Gay Liberation Society. So what we know is that they had debated about whether or not to have the affiliation with the Gay Liberation Society, but now we know what the benefits and what the setbacks of that were. So for the benefits of the affiliation, they'd wanted to capitalise on the Gay Liberation Society's monetary resources. They wanted to cash in on the university grant and also the funds that the disco at the Students' Union brought in as well. And they also had, the Gay Liberation Society had premises and a telephone line, which also would have been very helpful with an affiliation. But ultimately, they decided against an affiliation with the Gay Liberation Society. And one of the key reasons for that, then this is a quote, is that obvious or open affiliation with the Gay Liberation Society might put off certain clients who have certain conceptions of gay lib, GLS and GLF, however inapplicable to QUB, GLF. And I think that really highlights some of the divisions within gay activism at the time as to whether or not people wanted revolution or reform, which I find really, really interesting. They were also fearful that it would put off potential funding bodies, which is very interesting because a majority of Cara-Friend's early income came from the government. Another thing that these documents tell us a lot about is the relationship between Cara-Friend and the National Friend Group. And Friend stands for Fellowship for the Relief of the Isolated and Emotionally in Need and Distress, which does not have much of a ring to it. So they opted for Friend instead, which was probably a very good move. They were established in 1971 by the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. They acted as a befriending and counselling group, and they operated regionally, so they would have had a branch in Newcastle, a branch in London, a branch all over England. They were really, really focused on bridging urban-rural divides through local befriending groups. And I've always sort of wondered what the relationship between Cara-Friend and Friend was, because it tells us a lot about the relationship between groups in Northern Ireland and groups in Great Britain. So I was very excited that the founding documents also tell us about this. And they recorded the benefits of becoming a local friend group. Was that that Friend were already reputable, and that they would build a platform at Cara-Friend, and they could also capitalise on some of the extensive training events that Friend offered. But some of the drawbacks were that they would have to answer to a central body in London, because that's where Friend operated from. And I think whenever you're starting off as a very new activist group with no real income, the challenge of having to go over to London every now and again probably isn't terribly appealing. So they decided that they would not become a local friend group, but rather a recognised Northern Irish equivalent. It was important to Cara-Friend members that they had a working relationship with Friend, and again this is a direct quote, to prevent a local maverick from setting himself up as a local organiser and setting up a friend group, which again highlights some of the divisions that were within gay activism in Northern Ireland at the time. It's also worth noting that the new collection has a number of Friend guidebooks, so if anybody had an interest in researching Friend, you no longer have the responsibility of having to go over to London and pay lots of money for flights and hotels while you look at LSE's archives. You can actually look at some of the things here now. So there are annual reports from Newcastle, and there's also a lot of information about setting up a friend group as well, so if anybody had any interest in that, that would be there for it. That's now catered for you in the new collection. Let's talk about sex. So everybody else had very interesting stuff. This is my fun slide. Things are about to get explicit. So as well as offering befriending services and working with public health bodies, Cara-Friend also became instrumental in providing safe sex education. This was of course cemented by the 1980s AIDS crisis. Many sex education materials at this time were profoundly anti-sex and strongly encouraged abstinence and limiting your sexual partners. Some more liberal bodies issued advice on condoms, but there was very little in the way of advice that was strongly applicable to gay men especially. So from the 1980s, Cara-Friend attempted to address these issues by setting up an AIDS helpline that was established in 1986, and it was staffed by some Cara-Friend members, but also people who worked with different public health bodies. So there was counsellors and people with medical backgrounds, and it eventually became a breakaway group. Then also there was Derry Cara-Friend for a while, that later became Foil-Friend, as another group that was set up, and then finally the Rainbow Project, which is now our big gay men's health charity. So they established different subgroups to tackle the issue of men's health. but the new archival material gives some idea about Cara-Friend's policy on sex education at this time, and Cara-Friend's sex education policy really stood in stark contrast to the sort of material that would have been issued by the government at the time, which, like I said, really focused on abstinence, and it used very critical language. So I just want to give a flavour of what the new archive tells us about sex education, and that is that it was explicit and that it was focused on the joys of sex. So they had extremely comprehensive materials that dispelled myths relating to HIV. In terms of HIV infection, rimming is remarkably safe. That was one of the pieces of advice that they gave out on the telephone. They also made some helpful suggestions about using condoms during oral sex, suggesting that if you do not like the taste of rubber, you can use foodstuffs to great effect. They stressed the importance of comfort and consent, and used language which reflected everyday experiences of sexuality. One of the most explicit pieces of advice that I came across was, as with vaginal sex, the person who is being screwed should see to their comfort first, before they start considering what they can do to their partner's cock with their arse muscles. Having the words cock and arse muscles on a government piece of literature is completely unthinkable. So yeah, very explicit advice that was really relevant to what people were actually doing in their private lives. Another one of the key themes that came up a lot in the New York Archive material is youth policy. I want to step a little bit on the toes of what Peter was talking about earlier, and sort of media depictions of homosexuality. Youth work hasn't always been something that's been possible for gay activists in the 1970s. The media really portrayed homosexual people as predators and paedophiles. And this was something that was really exacerbated by sort of the culture of institutionalised sex abuse at the time. So in Northern Ireland you had instances like in Cork, obviously, also people like Dr. Morris Fraser, who had worked at the hospital in Belfast, and he had been convicted twice on child sex offence charges, but remained able to practice medicine. And then of course you've got things like Jimmy Savile and BBC, and lots of institutionalised sex abuse, which was all public knowledge at the time, and people used the gay community as scapegoats for that. Sorry, my throat's drying up. So you had this moral panic in the media about how LGBT groups would corrupt young people, and as a result you see Cara-Friend's policy towards youth being extremely cautious, especially given that some of their funding was dependent on the government. And that changes again in 1976, and that changes mostly because of the police raids on gay activist groups at this time. And those raids were a result of a young man who'd recently come onto the gay scene, his parents finding out, his father being in the RUC, and then the police raids on different organisations were then implemented as a reaction to that. So between March and June 1976, their policy had changed. So in March, minors who are under 16 who contact Cara-Friend are to be informed that they cannot be befriended. By June that year, they'd actually upped the age to 17, so younger people were then denied access to the services that were provided by Cara-Friend. This new archive material also tells us about how these things changed. Obviously now Cara-Friend is one of the most prominent LGBT youth services in the province, working to include LGBT safer sex practices in the curriculum, obviously with events like this, putting LGBT history out there. So the new archive material sort of shows how that started to become possible, but it also shows quite interesting aspects of like how far the government supported that. So the grants for that work didn't come from the Department of Health and Social Services, like the majority of Cara-Friend's money. They actually came from charities like Save the Children and Sundevall. They also carried out surveys in schools in 1998. Surveys were carried out in Donegal, Tyrone and Derry in conjunction with a group in Dublin. And They highlighted different constitutional reasons as to why youth education started to become important, and a lot of that had to do with the peace process. So the 1999 Northern Ireland Act dictates that all public bodies must have policies which guarantee non-discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation. So because of some of the new policies that were coming through post-Troubles, Cara-Friend were able to start reaching younger audiences. And these are just some of my favourite documents from the collection. So this is a map from the Conference for Friend in 1980, and they have marked out, I don't know if you can see it, they've marked out all the different places where people can come into Belfast, and then they've also marked out the gay safe areas. So you've got the Students' Union, University Street, Corrymeela House, Corrymeela were the LGBT affirming faith group, Great Victoria Street Station for people coming in on the train, you've got the ferry terminals, and Central Belfast marked out as well. And another one of these, now this won't actually be transferred to PRONI, this little sketch here, it's on the one of the annual reports which PRONI already has, but I found it really interesting. It's sort of an example of marginalia. That's something that medieval historians have tended to use, so they've looked at little doodles that monks have done in the size of like religious texts or whatever, and have used those as historical documents to find out more about the people who have actually been there at the time of production of these documents. And I find this really interesting because you've got the little Venus symbol and the little cartoon lady holding her plaque, and it says Irish above it. And one of the things that regularly comes up whenever you do research on the Troubles and LGBT history is people ask, you know, was the gay community, was it sectarian or not? And people often say, no, it wasn't. It was no, everybody just wanted the same thing. But I just find it very interesting that anytime I do research, it seems to be a real division between Republican women and Unionist men, and I just thought the little Irish thing was funny. So that's just a favour of some of the things that are in there. There's also a number of conference documents. There's correspondence from mental health groups, including Hollybell Hospital, Family Planning Association, Counselling Services. There is conference papers from all the different National Friend conferences. There's a scrapbook of newspaper clippings from the James Kirkup case for Gay News and their blasphemy trial. So yeah, there's a lot of different things for anybody who's interested. Plans for the future is that these documents are now out of my hands. They've been transferred to PRONI as far as I know, and they will be catalogued by the private records team here. And that will probably happen alongside the recataloguing of the existing collection, which will be done, I assume, after the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association papers are redone, and that's really just to make sure that the material can become more accessible. At the minute, these collections you can only access through a researcher agreement, and that's really to protect the identity of the people mentioned in the files, as a lot of it's really personal correspondence, and there's a vetting procedure that needs to be in place for that. And next, fill in more gaps. Although the new collection fills many of the gaps that are in the existing Cara-Friend archive, there are still certain things that we don't know. The representation of lesbian and bisexual people is really underrepresented, as is trans, and the documents for Foil-Friend and Derry Cara-Friend are also not there out of the whole collection. I think I found one photocopy of the Foil-Friend annual report. So there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of collecting activist histories, but at least this is a step in the right direction. So thank you for listening.